Hi, and welcome back to Act on Mental Health. My name is Sean Hardy, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Now, today is our final episode in our series, Act for Anxiety. Now, if you want to know more about anxiety and how to diminish the symptoms, or at least the overall intensity, I do have a video that goes over some exposure techniques that you're welcome to watch after this. So we're going to get into committed action. So how to take some small steps to make some big changes so you can live a life toward your values through committed action. Now, if you've enjoyed this series, this would be a great time to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want to hear more updates when they come out. I also want to point you to my website, seanhardy.com, for today's free resource, the Committed Action Worksheet. This worksheet will help you to set SMART goals, identify barriers, and develop problem-solving strategies to take meaningful action toward your values. Let's get into committed action and how it can help you move toward the life that you want, no matter what obstacles are in your way. Committed action is the process and act of taking meaningful steps that align with your values, even when it's uncomfortable or difficult. It's about turning intentions into actions. In ACT, we emphasize that living a values-driven life requires ongoing action. It's not enough to identify your values, you have to act on them. Think of committed action like climbing a mountain. Sometimes the path zigzags, and it might feel like you're going in the wrong direction. You're not going up, but you're going down. But those detours are necessary to reach the summit. Now, I've grown up living in the Midwest of the United States. Now, there's not a lot of mountains in the Midwest. So places like Illinois, Kansas, Wisconsin, and Indiana, and Michigan, they're just not full of mountains. So when I say mountain, think of it like a very large hill. Now, 20 years ago, I was tasked with making a promotional video in a series leading up to a middle school retreat. Now, 20 years ago, I was in much better shape, and I was a part of a group of interns that were supposed to be making these videos. So this video series led up to this retreat called the Summit. And so this required us to go from Illinois to Wisconsin on a snowy January day. We went to a place called Devil's Lake. The lake was frozen over, and on either side of this lake were two peaks that you could travail. And this is why it got its name, Devil's Lake, because these two peaks look like horns. So we chose one of those peaks to travail, and we set out with our video equipment and began to navigate. Now, there were rock formations covered in snow, which made it more difficult, more challenging. There were some icy spots and snowy spots. There were crevices that formed a path that you could walk up. And there were these rock faces that were 20 to 30 feet high that we had to use our rope equipment to navigate up. We had harnesses and pulleys. It was quite the adventure. Now, throughout this 4 to 6 hour journey, it was snowing, which made it even more difficult and also beautiful. We were tasting the snowflakes and kind of taking in the scenes. We all got along great as well, which made it an even better experience. And we were determined to make it to the summit. Now, we were also filming various parts, which we had memorized scripts, and we used our best acting skills while also noting that this was actually challenging to climb up as we made it up there. Long story short, we made it and we celebrated and laughed all the way down from the summit. And as we went home, we shared our stories while sipping hot cocoa. Now, funny enough, when we got back to Rockford about 2 hours later, we noticed that the tapes, as we opened them up, because back in those days you couldn't record onto the actual camera, you had to record on these tapes and then take it from those tapes and then transfer it over to the computers. So as we opened them up, we noticed they were soaking wet. And we immediately knew that this was not good. And our video guy, he tried his best to make it work, but he only got a few of the pieces of that film to work and that were dry enough to transport over. So we were pretty miserable, but our boss was even more miserable, and he was not happy, to say the least. Now, he was understanding that, we tried our best, but he knew that you couldn't really go to a retreat called the Summit if you couldn't show that you went to the summit. And so he sent us back on a second trip. Now, we weren't as happy the second time around, but we knew where we were going, and the weather was actually great that day. So the final result actually was better than if we would have just had the snowy day, because we had the snow, which made it seem more gritty and more realistic, more challenging. And then we had beautiful skies for some of the scenes that we shot, which really just made it all come together. So the final result of the promotional videos was even better than if we would have gone with the original plan. Similarly, committed action isn't about making perfect progress. It's about consistent, intentional steps toward what matters most to you so that you have stories to share. For example, if your value is creativity, committed action may look like signing up for an art class, even if self doubt tells you that you're not good enough. Or why would you want to improve? You're not that good. Or if your value is connection, it might mean reaching out to a friend, even if anxiety tells you to isolate, to avoid a panic attack that could happen. Now, these actions might feel uncomfortable at first, but they're essential for living a meaningful life. So let's get into the details on how we can do this in everyday life. To make committed action effective, we use SMART goals. Now, SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So let's break this down one at a time. Specific. Define exactly what you want to achieve and be clear about it. Don't just say, I want to be healthier. That's kind of vague. Say, I will take a 30-minute walk 3 times a week. Measurable. Ensure that your goal has a clear outcome. For example, I will complete 1 painting by the end of the month. You can check that off if you do it, or leave it unchecked if you didn't do it. Attainable. Set goals that challenge you but are realistic. If you haven't exercised in a year, don't start off with running a 5K. Start off with running 5 minutes. Relevant. Make sure your goals align with your values. If you value family, a goal might be to schedule a weekly game night with your family. Time bound. Give yourself a deadline to create a sense of urgency and focus. If you want something done, give it a deadline. Goals should read as specific statements of intentions that any person who reads it, even if they don't know anything about your value, they would immediately be able to understand what you intend to do. Goals are a starting place, not an end point. Once you have goals down, you may be ready for the next part, which would be to create systems where you can become more efficient by getting a lot of things done, a lot of goals done through some specific courses of action. Now, for more on this, I would recommend reading Atomic Habits by James Clear to better understand concepts like habit stacking and habit looping. These systems create a highway of various lanes for you to take that lead you in a valued direction, where if one of those lanes closes, that you don't have access to do it. Like for me, I ran for 60 days straight one time, just to say I had to run at least a mile. But then I had an injury to my foot because I ran too often, too much. And so then I couldn't run for 2 to 3 months. Okay. So in that case, if one lane closes, you have 3 or 4 other lanes to take at any time so that you can live that value. I love systems and I also love goals. So just for somebody out there that you've already got the goals part down, you may be ready for systems. Taking committed action might feel daunting at times, especially when you have internal or external barriers that may be getting in the way. Let's explore what might be holding you back and how to address those obstacles. Start by asking yourself, what is stopping me from taking the next step toward my value? These barriers often fall into 2 categories. The first would be internal barriers. These would include difficult thoughts that might come up, emotions that you might experience, or sensations that might get out of hand. So you might have some self-doubt, a fear of failure, or anxiety. For example, you might have that automatic thought come up, I'll never be good enough to master this. I'll never be good enough to succeed. Or you might have that thought, what if I fail? And you begin to imagine the worst case scenarios. Or you may say, I feel too anxious to even start. And you actually have physical sensations like your heart is racing, or your mind is just having so many thoughts that it just seems impossible to move forward. The second category is external barriers. So these are practical challenges like time constraints, lack of resources, or support from others. For example, I don't have enough time to commit to this right now. I don't have the skills or knowledge that I need. I don't know what the next step is. Or I'm too busy taking care of others in my life to focus on myself. Once you've identified what specific obstacles are getting in your way, next is to develop some problem solving strategies to address them. So, for internal barriers, here are a few strategies that are helpful. In ACT, we use something called cognitive diffusion for problematic thinking. So recognize that thoughts like I'm not good enough are just thoughts, not facts. Use diffusion techniques to distance yourself from unhelpful narratives. The second strategy you can use is something called willingness. Check in with yourself and ask yourself, how willing am I to do this right now? And put it on a scale of 1 to 10. You allow uncomfortable emotions like anxiety or fear to come along for the ride. But you need to check in with yourself on asking, how willing am I to do this? Understand that discomfort is part of the journey, but it doesn't have to stop you. The third strategy would be to use mindfulness. So stay present and focus on action itself rather than the overwhelming what ifs. If you know that your mind is racing, begin to get to the present, notice your immediate surroundings, and use your five senses to kind of root yourself or ground yourself. For external barriers, try these problem solving strategies. First, break the task into smaller steps. So if time feels like a constraint to you and you don't have large chunks of time, or it just seems overwhelming that you don't even want to start, well, try breaking a task that takes 4 hours into 15 or 10-minute segments, something that's manageable and doable, so that you know that you're getting progress toward the goal of accomplishing it. Second strategy is to seek support. Sometimes it's okay to ask for help from friends, family, or mentors who can encourage you or assist you. Third is to schedule your actions. So block off specific times in your calendar for value-based actions, treating them as non-negotiables. Now, I think you should have two things at your disposal here: a task list, so you know what you need to get done, and a calendar. You need to know where to put it. So when and where am I going to do this? When you have those two things working for you, it's amazing what you can get done. Before we end the video, I want you to write down one action you've been avoiding. Identify the barrier, internal or external, that are holding you back. Then brainstorm a strategy for each of those barriers. For example, if the action is to start a creative project and the barrier is fear of failure, which would be internal, and a lack of time, which would be external, use the strategy of cognitive diffusion to acknowledge the fear as a thought and schedule 15 minutes each day to work on the project until the deadline. Even the smallest action can lead to a meaningful progress in that project. One step at a time eventually gets you there. Thank you for joining me in this final video of our series, Act for Anxiety. Committed action is where all the pieces start to come together. It's about living your values, taking meaningful steps, and staying the course, even when it's hard. Don't forget to download the Committed Action worksheet at my website, seanhardy.com. This tool will help you set smart goals and overcome obstacles on your journey to a value-driven life. If you've enjoyed this series, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who might benefit. Remember, your journey to a more purposeful and mindful life begins with a single click.